So thank you to everyone who expressed interest in how the EV conversion of my Morris Minor is going. I originally intended that just to be like a Sunday musing to talk about it, because there'd been a bit of interest in my car, which is in the background of quite a lot of videos. But it seems like you folks all would like to know. So I'm going to keep you up to date. We're going to try and do some conversion in progress videos. This is the first one. So, as you can see, we are in the chaos that is our garage. As some of you know, we've been building a house for the last 3 years, and behind me is detritus from building a house. So, part of this is going to have to be organising things a little bit differently, because a lot of this is targeted towards, like, there are the drywall screws, there are the, there is the plumbing stuff, and a lot of that's kind of done. So I'm actually getting to move on a little bit and having a little bit of free time that I'm allocating to converting my car. So here we are. And I've actually started. I mean, it may not seem like it when I tell you what I've done, but I have actually started. So a little bit of background. I started this project back in England. Actually, I managed to get a motor and a controller. At the time, what I got was a NetGain Warp 8 and a Curtis controller that was matched to it. And this came out of a Volkswagen Golf, or Rabbit if you're American. So the Rabbit over here, but a Mark 1 Golf, no, sorry, Mark 2 Golf conversion. And the guy who owned it, who's a friend of ours, Adam, he gave me a good deal on buying those parts. The problem was I never had enough money to buy the batteries, and that's still going to be a challenge, but we'll come to that. So when we moved over to the US, I brought those parts with me. The car, when it was last restored, it has actually been restored twice, but when it was last restored, I changed the back axle to a 3.7, I believe, diff, which is it's a Ford Escort diff, which unfortunately disintegrated shortly after I got here. So then began a long process, which has ended up with the car being off the road for pretty much 3 of the 4 years that we've been in the US, and it is still off the road. And the reason for that is actually this bit here. This is a flange that goes on the differential, and unfortunately, when it was sent off to be reconditioned, they fitted the wrong flange. I don't know how it happened. Oh, well, I sort of know how it happened, because it turned out the differential I sent was completely knackered. So they got a new differential, well, a new old differential, reconditioned that, and obviously they sent the wrong flange. And unfortunately, at the time, my car was in a garage with some great guys locally who were trying to get it back on the road for me, because I didn't have this space. And they installed the differential and then went to mate the prop shaft to it and discovered that it didn't fit. And then there was a long discussion about how we were going to do this, how could we resolve it, ideally without taking the differential back out, because that's quite expensive. And then it came to the head with them basically saying we can't do that, because no one in the area around us will handle a Ford differential from Europe. I don't know why. It's not that complicated. Differentials are a bit of a dark art, and I've been very hesitant to take it apart. And that's when I came across this wonderful, handy, I don't even know how to describe it. It's a shortcut. It's a massive shortcut which allows you to change the flange without taking the differential out of the car. And that is a lifesaver for me, because I don't have to then adjust the backlash on the diff. I don't have to do anything but just take off a bolt, a crush washer, and put a new bolt back on. If it all goes horribly wrong and the differential dies, then I still have to send it back to England, which is what I have to do now. So really, it doesn't make any odds. It may not sound like that's the most important thing to do, but here's the thing. If I convert this car using the method that I'm thinking of doing, then I need that differential. And why do I need that? Because, again, no one will talk to me about it. It's very upsetting. So I spoke to a couple of hot rodding companies that are local, and I emailed some guys further away, and I spoke to a number of suspension specialists about my earlier plans, which were to try and fit a subframe. So I wanted a subframe so that I could install the motor from a RAV4 hybrid at the back, and that's actually a 50 kilowatt motor. Not enormous power output, but perfectly adequate for a little car like the Morris Minor. But no one will do that. No one. Which is weird, because, you know, America is the land of hot rods, but they just kind of lose interest when you say it's electric. So I've gone back to another idea. So on the Open Inverter forum, there is the Lexus GS450H thread, which is really worth reading if you're looking at doing an EV conversion that is pretty cheap. And as you can see, what we have, well, this is actually a diagram of the Ford gearbox that is in the car. And I know it's a Morris, but it's actually a Ford Type 9 gearbox in the car. And that is going to be hopefully replaced with the gearbox from a GS450, which is a Lexus hybrid. And you might say, well, a hybrid isn't an EV, but it turns out that thanks to the work of Damien Maguire, who, huge kudos to Damien for this, like, he puts in so much work. The Lexus gearbox has enough power, it has about 250 kilowatts of power that it can output. In a Morris Minor, that's ridiculous, I don't need all of that. But that gearbox might fit in place of the Type 9. It's definitely bigger, but it looks like most of the biggerness will actually sit in the engine bay. It's definitely heavier, and that is a challenge because it looks like we're going to be trying to support that weight using a combination of the support where the standard gearbox mount is and then a support that probably rests somewhere on the chassis legs up the front. This is going to be like the edge, the bleeding edge of my technical abilities with metalworking, because I can weld, but only a little bit. So we'll see how this goes. This is going to be super exciting. But the other reason I need to get the car on the road, and the first job is going to be trying to get my car back actually running on petrol, is because I need to sell the parts. And I need to know whether this differential that I'm trying to repair is actually going to work. And the only way that I'm going to find out if it's going to work is by throwing a few miles on it. So hopefully this time I can get the car on the road, just get it running, throw a few miles on it, make sure everything's happy, and then I can start the work of actually getting an electric conversion done. Okay, on with the replacement, although not in these clothes. So, I have made the special tool. which is a very generous term for what is effectively a bar with some holes in. And the theory goes that the flange on the back of the differential, you can put a couple of bolts in, like so. That's one, and that's two. Now, in theory, this then can lock against either the car body or the ground, and you can unbolt this center nut, and that allows you to take this off the spline shaft, remove the crush washer that lives behind it, and then replace the crush washer and put the flange back on. Now, the tricky thing is that in theory, what you're meant to do is mark the flange and the nut so that you do it up a certain number of turns, the same number of turns as you undid it, and that should give you a fixed point and set the pressure back where it was, set the amount of pressure on that crush washer back to be the same. The tricky thing for me is that I'm changing the flange, so I'm not 100% sure that this is going to work. But like I say, either way, I either need to send the differential to England to have the flange replaced, or I need to send the differential to England to be serviced if this goes wrong and have the flange replaced. So I guess this is kind of not exactly a no-win, maybe a sort of only moderate lose scenario. Either this works and everything's fine, or it doesn't work. So as you can see, I managed to get this off. This is the old flange. This is the new flange. You can actually see part of the reason that I really want to change it. So on this flange, the bolts sit very close to the edge on a very small, thin flange. On this one, they sit a little bit more inboard, but it's a much larger, much more sturdy flange. So these are apparently quite rare. So if you have, if any of you are Ford fans and are desperate for one of these apparently quite rare flanges, then hit me up. Just, you know, send Transport Evolved a message, and I'm sure we can arrange something essentially for the cost of shipping, because it's no use at all to me. So the main question that I have, which is kind of important, is the distance between here and where the surface the nut pushes against, the mating surface there, is that the same length as the distance between here and that surface? And I mean, it looks pretty similar, but I'm going to try and measure that, which is a bit tricky because this one has a much smaller hole in it than this one. So I'm going to have a look at those two things, and then hopefully press on with getting this onto the car, which would be a huge leap forward. So I guess it doesn't really come as any kind of surprise, despite me checking the thickness and they seem to be pretty much the same. It was a difficult measurement given the lack of equipment. So I chose instead to not replace the crush washer, because if this doesn't work, then I may well have to do that later. And I still have a replacement seal here, just in case I need that. Basically got it about as tight as I can and thread locked it on, which may or may not be tight enough. We may find that I destroy this differential, which will be very upsetting, but I can order a new one if I have to. The next job is to put the prop shaft back on, so I'm going to go fish the prop shaft out of the car, put that back on, and then we need to charge the battery, get some fresh petrol in this car, and hopefully Rebecca, she'll be back on the road. And that is not with the intent of actually driving her any significant distance. It just means I can get her in and out of the garage, and I can also demonstrate that the engine and gearbox work, so I can sell them at a reasonable price, as opposed to just, well, they come out of a car that hasn't moved for 3 years. So let's see if I can get the prop shaft back on today, because that would be amazing. So it still is unfeasibly cold in the garage, but I do have the prop shaft reconnected. I have the correct flange on the differential. The battery is now charging. It was running at about 0.8 volts last time I measured it, which is really not great. I've put the battery tender on it to kind of trickle charge it as slowly and gently as possible, and we'll see whether this battery can hold a charge to start the car. So that, as you can probably gather from the frantic running around, did not quite go to plan. And the plan was pretty simple. I'd put the jump starter pack on the car, turn the engine over a few times with the immobilizer off, so the ignition circuits would be off and she wouldn't start. That would let me get some oil pressure up. Once the oil pressure was built up, I was going to flip the immobilizer off, we were going to start the car, let her warm up for a bit, just let her sit in here in the garage, not ideal, but for 10-15 minutes, let her warm up, get some of that fuel through, and then in a few days time I'd get a new battery, or I'd just use the jump starter again and I'd get a trip permit. We'd take her out for a drive, make sure that the gearbox and things are working, and then we could actually start stripping her down. The parts could go for sale. Unfortunately, what actually happened was when I put the jump starter pack on, it couldn't quite push out enough power to turn the engine over. I mean, it was turning over, but slowly. But then the last time I tried, in fact the last 2 times I tried, something odd happened, which is that it felt like she was trying to turn over even though the ignition circuit was off. And the final time I tried, she just carried on trying to start, even though the ignition circuit was off at the ignition switch. So I'm guessing that the starter solenoid is jamming, but I don't know. I did thwack it with a screwdriver, but I can't tell if she stopped then because I thwacked it with the screwdriver or because the voltage just dipped low enough that she stopped trying to start. So I'm going to have to do a bit more fault finding before we can do anything, and obviously I think I am going to need to spring for a new battery, which is kind of upsetting. But where's the driving video? I'm sure that some of you are dying to see how that first drive went, but I actually only drove out of the garage, let her warm up some more, then drove her back in. Why? Well, for one, my tags have expired, and perhaps, more importantly, the brakes are currently souffle-like in their softness. You press the pedal, and like my old Yugo, Rebecca starts preparation to schedule some light retardation at some ill-defined point in the future. So I need to have a bit of a look at that. She is back on charge though with a shiny new battery which doesn't really fit but was relatively cheap, and our next video will probably be me scrolling through eBay for several hours looking for a cheap Lexus GS450H transmission. If you have any leads on one of them, drop us a line. Otherwise, that's it for today. As always, thanks to the folks on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month patrons. Special thanks to our $50 a month patrons, John Lyons, Regine Fellows, Jeffrey Songster, Anonymous Freak, Paul Conway, Laura Sanborn, Anthony Coates, and Tesla in the Gong. And our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month Patreon supporters, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerback, Sean Ueda, Will Graylan, and Ian. And you can join all of these Patreon supporters by following the links below, or send us a donation through Ko-fi or Bitcoin. You'll also find a link to our free Discord server, so come on in and join the fun. And if you're in need of some swag, do check out our merch over at Redbubble. After the names have scrolled, you'll see a suggestion for a new video, so please consider watching it if you haven't, and I'll be back very soon. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving!